Dining room was dimly lit, the ceiling fan above lazily spinning, casting slow, sweeping shadows across the table. Ron Jeremy poured himself a glass of red wine, while Elliot Brown, now 3 weeks into his new reality as a live-in helper, spooned mashed potatoes onto his plate. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of a television from a room far down the hall. The room where Jerry stayed, mostly silent, mostly still. Ron sighed, pushing his plate forward slightly. "I got a new case today," he said, taking a sip of wine. "Divorce. Wife wants the dog, the car, and apparently, the husband's balls in a blender." Elliot chuckled and shook his head. "People don't want love. They want leverage." Ron leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, and yet here I am, defending people who can't stand each other anymore. It's poetic in a cruel kind of way." Elliot was quiet for a moment, then stabbed at a piece of chicken with his fork. "You ever think this is punishment? The way life loops back and gives us the very thing we used to judge others for." Ron raised an eyebrow. "That philosophy degree still haunting you, Brown?" Elliot smirked. "No, just your whiskey." They both laughed softly, but the warmth in the room was strained. "Always was." "How's he doing today?" Ron asked eventually, voice low. Elliot shrugged. "Didn't say a word. I tried playing that stupid show. What was it, Adventure Time?" He looked at me like I offered him cyanide. "He hates me," Ron said simply, not as a complaint, but as fact. "Every day? Just stares at the wall like I burned down his world." "You kinda did," Elliot replied, his tone not accusing but blunt. "You were the lawyer who helped his mother gut his father. And then his father gutted himself. That's a long chain of resentment, man." Ron nodded. "I know." They sat in silence for a beat, the kind of silence that stretches between two men who've both been through their own versions of hell and are just trying to make it to bedtime without collapsing under the weight of it. Elliot reached for the water pitcher. "You think I'm helping?" Ron looked at him, long and hard, then finally said, "I think you're surviving. And I think that matters." Elliot nodded slowly, his eyes tired but not hollow. "He still hasn't spoken a word to me." "I guess he likes you," Ron said. "Maybe we need a different approach." They sat there, eating quietly again, sharing the unspoken understanding that raising a child wasn't about fairy tales or soft piano music. It was about showing up every damn day, until maybe, just maybe, the kid lets you stay. The morning sunlight filtered through the linen curtains of Ron's quiet home. The house hummed with the soft sounds of breakfast being prepared. Elliot stood in the kitchen, frying eggs, flipping them in silence. The sizzle of the pan was the only sound aside from the occasional clatter of dishes. Ron had already left for his law office earlier that morning, leaving Elliot alone to care for Jerry, like he had every day for the past 3 weeks. After finishing breakfast, Elliot placed everything neatly on a tray and walked into Jerry's room. The boy lay motionless in his bed, eyes open but distant. Jerry had been bedridden for 2 years, ever since the night he tried to end his own life, just days after his father, Brian Tucker, had succeeded in ending his. Ron, the very man Jerry blamed for the destruction of his family, had taken him in, adopted him, and now Elliot, a stranger full of his own fury and regret, had moved into this broken little world to help care for him. "Morning, soldier," Elliot said quietly, setting the tray on the side table. Jerry didn't respond. He never did. Elliot carefully slid one arm under Jerry's back and the other under his knees, gently lifting the boy with ease. Jerry was light, almost too light. Elliot carried him to the bathroom, supporting his neck, head, and back, placing him down on a padded bench. He cleaned Jerry slowly, carefully, talking every now and then in short bursts that didn't expect a reply. He helped him brush his teeth, cleaned every inch of the boy's fragile body without comment, then dressed him in a clean set of pajamas. Finally, he lifted Jerry back into bed, propped him up against the pillows, and placed a folded blanket over his legs. He fed him his breakfast. Then, instead of speaking, Elliot sat down in the worn-out recliner beside the bed, turned on the television, and without asking, put on an old VHS copy of The Never-Ending Story. The movie played, filling the room with imagination and magic, Fantasia, Falker, The Nothing, and Elliot didn't say a word the entire time. He never even glanced at Jerry. He just watched, arms folded. After helping Jerry with the toilet and feeding him lunch in silence, Elliot walked back to the recliner, inserted another tape. This time, Grave of the Fireflies. The room grew still again. The Japanese anime played out in a slow, heartbreaking cadence. The story of Seda and Setsuko, two siblings torn apart by war, survival, and hunger, unfolded on the screen. The dubbed English voices did nothing to soften the gut-wrenching tragedy. Jerry watched, unmoving, but Elliot kept glancing, watching, waiting. When the final scene came, Setsuko's spirit looking up, clutching the fruit drops tin, the flickering lights of the city in the background. Jerry's eyes welled up. His lips quivered. He tried to turn his face to the side, but the muscles refused to cooperate. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Then another. Elliot now knew. There is hope. The boy has emotions, but the loss of his loved one still haunts him. Elliot stood up, wordless, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out an old handkerchief, creased, but clean. He leaned forward, dabbed Jerry's face gently, wiped the tears with careful strokes, like a man tending to a wound. Still, he said nothing. Jerry's eyes met Elliot's, and Jerry immediately moved them away. He folded the handkerchief, tucked it back into his pocket, and walked quietly out of the room. Once outside the room, Elliot walked briskly down the hallway, his face set in a firm, unreadable mask. But the moment he closed the door to his own room, the mask shattered. He stumbled to the edge of the bed, sat down heavily, and let the tears come, silently at first, then with sobs that shook his chest and echoed off the walls. He didn't know why this particular moment had broken him. He hadn't cried when his wife Penelope was pregnant with his best friend's child. He hadn't cried when their daughter said she didn't want to see him anymore. He hadn't cried when he found out his best friend stabbed him in the back. Elliot had taken all of it like stone takes weather, slowly eroding, but never cracking. And yet, here he was, crying because a child, paralyzed and burdened with more pain than he ever deserved, had let a single tear fall. A tear that he couldn't even wipe on his own. A tear born not from physical pain, but from something deeper, something Elliot understood all too well. He stood up shakily, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself, eyes red, cheeks wet, lips trembling. "This is ridiculous," he whispered. He sniffed, wiped his face with his sleeve, and looked again. "My hate was my weapon against the world," he said slowly, quietly, but clearly, his voice gaining strength with each word. "But I will not let a child dedicate his life to hate." The clock on Ron Jeremy's office wall ticked loudly, a metronome of legal dread, as Xavier Campbell sat across from the famed divorce attorney. Ron, always composed in a three-piece suit that looked like it had never known a wrinkle, leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad filled with scrawled notes and reminders about other people's ruined marriages. Xavier, on the other hand, looked like a man unraveling by the hour. Early 40s, sharp dresser, but today the collar was askew and the watch was on backwards. His eyes were tired and his fingers twitched on the edge of the leather armrest like a man trying to keep himself from jumping off a ledge. "I think she's cheating on me," Xavier said, his voice hoarse. "Audrey, my wife, with her friend, a psychiatrist named Nathaniel Watson." Ron folded his hands on the desk and nodded slightly. "What makes you think that?" Xavier laughed bitterly. "She calls him Nathan now. Casual, like they're teenagers. She spends hours talking with him. Sometimes at his office, sometimes on walks. God knows where else. She's different, Ron. Distant. Calm. Too calm." Ron raised an eyebrow. "And you said you've been feeling physically off?" Xavier nodded. "Yeah. Weak. Foggy-headed. Jittery. Some days I can't think straight. I've had random stomach cramps, dizzy spells. And I'm angry all the time. I'm not like that. Not usually. I think I'm being poisoned." Ron didn't flinch. Just flipped to a clean page on his pad. "You tell Audrey any of this." "Are you kidding? She'd have me institutionalized by dinner time." Ron tapped his pen again, then said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to fake a business trip, something last minute, urgent, very inconvenient. I'll have my assistant book a flight, reserve a hotel room. You won't actually go anywhere. Instead, while your wife thinks you're gone, you'll check yourself into a clinic, full body workup, blood panels, the works. And a psychiatric consult too." Xavier blinked. "You think I'm crazy? I think if you're being drugged, they'll find it. And if you're not, we'll rule it out. Either way, it's ammo." Xavier considered it. "What about her? How do I know she's not just actually in love with the guy?" Ron leaned forward, eyes sharp. "That's where this guy comes in." He pressed the intercom. "Send him in." A few seconds later, the door opened, and in walked Willie B. Hard again. He looked like he had been peeled off the sidewalk. Tall and thin as a coat rack, his trench coat was crumpled and smelled faintly of rain and menthol. His boots were scuffed, his fedora older than sin, and his eyes, sharp, darting, belonged to a man who'd read every secret in the world and still hadn't found a good one. "Xavier Campbell, meet Willie B. Hard again," Ron said. "Willie's been doing this work longer than I've been getting people alimony." Willie gave Xavier a nod and stuck out a hand. "I find the truth," he said, voice like gravel in a coffee tin, "even when it smells like garbage." Xavier hesitated, then shook his hand. "You come highly recommended?" Willie shrugged. "I once found a woman's boyfriend living in her attic. I'm not in this for the Yelp reviews." Ron smiled faintly. "Willie will tell Audrey. Document her comings and goings. Who she meets. Where she goes. If there's a skeleton in that walk-in closet of hers, he'll find it. Xavier reached for his wallet and pulled out an envelope thick with cash. Here's your fee, he said, sliding it across Ron's desk. Ron took it without flinching and handed it to his assistant through the door. We'll get your travel bookings squared away. You go home, pack a bag, and make your dramatic exit. We'll take it from there. Xavier stood slowly, his face a mix of dread and determination. All right, I guess it's time to pack up and leave. Back at the Jeremy house, Elliot stood silently in the corner of the room, arms folded, as the physiotherapist, a stout middle-aged man named Joel, worked through Jerry's passive range of motion exercises. He gently moved the boy's thin arms and legs, careful not to strain the delicate joints. Jerry's face remained expressionless, his eyes locked on the ceiling as Joel maneuvered one leg up and down, then bent it at the knee. We're just trying to prevent contractures, Joel muttered as he shifted to the boy's arms. Keep some tone in these muscles. Otherwise, he'll be a statue before he's 15. Elliot said nothing. He watched. Jerry's body was limp, unresponsive, but Joel carried on, rotating the wrists, stretching the ankles, adjusting posture. A small electric stimulator buzzed briefly as he applied it to the quadriceps. Jerry flinched, barely. That's good, Joel said. That's something. After about 40 minutes, Joel packed up his gear, wiped his forehead with a towel, and stepped out of the room. Elliot followed, closing the door gently behind him. Out in the hallway, Joel sighed and leaned against the wall. He's not trying, Joel said. Not even a little. I mean, I've seen worse injuries, Elliot. I've seen worse odds. But this boy, he doesn't want to get better. Elliot looked at him, jaw clenched. You saying he's lazy? No, Joel replied calmly. I'm saying he's broken. Whatever happened to him, it's not just physical. The body will follow the mind, but the mind, his mind, is still trapped wherever the damage was done. Elliot didn't respond, so Joel continued. If he starts showing the smallest sign of will, if he wants to move, if he wants to fight, he could recover more than you think. We're not talking miracles, but with neuroplasticity, with time and effort, he might actually walk. Joel grabbed his bag and looked Elliot in the eyes. But he has to want to walk, Elliot. Elliot walked back into Jerry's room, the tray of evening food in his hands. Mashed potatoes, soft-cooked vegetables, and some blended chicken. Not much flavor, but easy to swallow. Jerry didn't look at him, didn't blink, just lay there, his head slightly tilted toward the window. All right, champ, Elliot muttered, setting the tray down on the side table. He pulled the chair close to the bed and carefully lifted the spoon to Jerry's mouth. He fed him slowly, patiently. Between bites, Elliot wiped Jerry's chin with a cloth napkin, not saying much, just humming quietly to fill the silence. There was something sacred about the quiet in that room, like a space waiting for a spark. When the meal was done and the tray cleared, Elliot leaned back in the recliner beside the bed and turned on the TV. Tonight, we go classic, he said as he loaded up Raiders of the Lost Ark. As the opening scene played, the shadowy figure of Indiana Jones stepping into the booby-trapped temple, Elliot didn't watch the screen. He watched Jerry. Every 10 minutes or so, he'd glance over. Jerry didn't speak, didn't move, but something had changed. When Indy outran the giant rolling boulder, Elliot saw it. Jerry's eyes widened. Slightly. When Indy pulled out his revolver and shot the sword-wielding showman in the bazaar, Elliot caught the faintest flicker in the boy's lips. Was that amusement? And when the ark was finally opened and the spirits burst forth, melting faces and consuming Nazis in a storm of wrath, Jerry's pupils dilated. He was watching, really watching. When the credits rolled, he stood and stretched. All right, Jones. That's enough archaeology for one night. He moved toward the door, then paused and glanced back. Jerry's head was turned just slightly, barely noticeable, but it was there. Elliot stared for a second longer. You want more movies, he said quietly, more to himself than Jerry. He reached for the light switch. Sleep tight, kid. We'll watch more tomorrow. The hallway light clicked on as he stepped out. Later that night, at the dinner table, Elliot and Ron sat over leftover stew and crusty bread. Ron chewed slowly, glancing up when Elliot cleared his throat. I need a PS5, Elliot said bluntly. Ron raised an eyebrow. You planning to game your rage away, or what? Elliot didn't flinch. Just trust me. Ron paused for half a second, then wiped his hands and pulled out his phone. Done. It'll be delivered by tomorrow afternoon. Every movement in the Jeremy house that morning followed a practiced rhythm. Elliot bathed Jerry, brushed his hair, changed his clothes, and fed him spoon by spoon. Jerry didn't speak. He didn't move. But his eyes were open, and they followed Elliot's every move. That was enough for Elliot. After cleaning up, Elliot sat beside Jerry and opened the newspaper. The rustle of the pages filled the silence of the room. From time to time, Elliot would glance to his right, just the corner of his eye catching Jerry's face. And there it was, subtle, unmistakable. Expectation. A quiet, patient kind of hunger, not for food but for something else. More movies. Elliot smiled faintly, folded the newspaper, and set it aside. Well, kid, he said, walking over to the TV, guess it's movie time. He slid in a Blu-ray of Finding Nemo. As the tale of Marlin's relentless journey across oceans to find his lost son unfolded on screen, Elliot noticed the boy's eyes softening. Jerry watched. He watched. A flicker of something old and fragile stirred behind those vacant stares. By the time Marlin reunited with Nemo, there were tears again. Elliot leaned forward and gently wiped them. Yeah, he said softly. I cry at that part too. He sat beside Jerry and opened the next conversation, slowly and carefully, like a man talking to a ghost he hoped would return to life. Do you have a preference for a movie, Jerry? He asked. Silence. Jerry blinked. Elliot waited. After a moment, he chuckled. I guess you like my choices then. He rummaged through his collection and inserted The Red Balloon, a 1956 French short film. A lonely boy in Paris finds a red balloon with a mind of its own. They become inseparable, Elliot explained as the film began. No one believes him, no one understands, but the balloon sticks with him. In the end, when the world tries to take the balloon away, all the other balloons come to help him escape. The film ended quietly. Elliot looked over. More tears. He reached out with the soft cloth and wiped Jerry's cheeks again. I am here, Jerry, he said quietly. One by one. We're all here. That evening, the doorbell rang. Ron answered it and signed off on a large Amazon box. He opened it in the hallway, revealing a brand new PlayStation 5. He carried it carefully to Jerry's room, where Elliot took it from him and began setting it up. As the screen flickered to life with the PS5 startup, Jerry's expression changed. His eyes widened slightly, a twitch in the corner of his mouth, a shadow of a smile. Excitement. Ron stood in the hallway, just outside the door, leaning on the frame. He watched the scene, a strange look in his eyes, perhaps pride, perhaps regret. Then Jerry's eyes met Ron's. The excitement faded. A curtain fell over Jerry's face like a storm moving in over sunshine. He turned his face away, cold, silent, guarded. Ron stood there quietly, the moment hanging like a weight in the doorway. The next few days unfolded with a quiet but growing rhythm. Elliot, who had never owned a gaming console in his life, found himself hunched over the PS5 controller in Jerry's room, desperately mashing buttons, trying to kill Baldur, the relentless, resurrecting boss from God of War. His hands cramped, his thumbs burned, and yet, the screen kept flashing, "You died." Again, and again, and again. Jerry lay in bed, his face blank, but his eyes weren't. His brow furrowed every time Elliot made the same mistake, his gaze fixed on the screen with a twitch of silent judgment. Elliot growled, "Oh, come on. What does it take to kill this guy? He just keeps coming back. Like Ron at the Thanksgiving buffet." He threw his hands up and leaned back, mock exhausted, then turned to Jerry and said with a grin, "You think you can do better than me, kid? Then get better. Sit up and do it." Jerry's eyes met his for a brief moment. There was no smirk, no grin, but the challenge had been heard. Still, the boy said nothing. Elliot sighed and dropped the controller onto the side table. Later that afternoon, it was movie time again. Elliot rummaged through his stack and pulled out Matilda, a 1996 movie about a brilliant little girl with telekinetic powers, a cruel principal, and a kind-hearted teacher who changes her life. As the film played on and Matilda made pancakes using only her mind, Jerry's expression began to shift. His lips parted slightly. When she spun a chair around with a flick of her eyes and sent a glass flying into a bully's face, Elliot chuckled, glancing at Jerry. "I know what you're thinking, kid," Elliot said. "You want to do all that to Ron, don't you? Especially the part where she launches Miss Trunchbull out the window. That would be hilarious if you ask me. Ron flying out of the window." Jerry gave no reply, but his eyes were glued to the screen, almost hungry for more. Elliot leaned back, folding his arms. "You know, though, if Ron's anyone in this movie," he said, "he's not Trunchbull. He's more like Miss Honey." He paused and looked at Jerry. "Yeah, the dorky teacher with a stupidly big heart. Took in Matilda when no one else wanted her. Quiet. Keeps his nose down. Cares too damn much. That's Ron, all right. He's the one who adopted you. He's the one taking care of you. When the world forgot you, he did not." Back at Ron's office, the fluorescent light buzzed softly overhead. The air was still, thick with tension. Xavier sat across from Ron, his hands resting stiffly on his knees, his eyes hollow and sunken. The weeks of confusion, of feeling like his mind was slipping through his fingers, had aged him. Ron leaned forward, slid a thin manila folder across the desk, and said in a level tone, "That's your medical report." Xavier picked it up with trembling hands, flipping through the pages. His lips moved silently as he tried to make sense of the unfamiliar terms. "You were being poisoned," Ron continued, his voice steady but heavy. "They were giving you pyridostigmine bromide. Small doses. Repeatedly. It causes long-term neurological damage. Brain fog. Hallucinations. Memory loss." Xavier looked up, eyes wide. What the hell are you talking about?" Ron nodded toward the report. "It wasn't random. It was calculated. According to the PI's report, your wife Audrey is having an affair with her psychiatrist lover, Nathaniel Watson." Xavier's jaw tensed. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to process each word like a punch. "They've been together for some time now," Ron said. "We don't know what they have planned, but they are definitely having an affair." Xavier let the folder slide from his hands onto the table. You're sure?" "I wish I weren't," Ron said, sliding over a second file. "Phone records. Surveillance photos. All of it. And giving you those banned meds. That is a criminal conspiracy." There was a long pause. Xavier stared at the file, his shoulders rising and falling slowly. "You need to call the police. Immediately," Ron added firmly. "And you need to file for divorce. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy." Xavier nodded slowly, then stood up, taking the files with him. "I'll go home first," he said, voice quiet but filled with purpose. "And call the cops." Ron's drive home was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Something about the way Xavier had reacted didn't sit right with him. He replayed the conversation in his head, the way Xavier's tone had shifted when he'd said he'd go home first. By the time Ron pulled into his driveway, the gnawing in his gut had turned into a full-blown itch he couldn't ignore. He shut off the engine, pulled out his phone, and dialed Willie. The PI answered on the second ring. "Yeah, Ron." Willie's voice was casual, but Ron didn't waste time. "Willie, I need you to dig a bit deeper into Xavier," Ron said, stepping out of the car. "Not just the basics. Turn over every rock. And there's something else." Ron lowered his voice and told him something. Willie was silent for a few seconds, then let out a slow breath. "All right," Willie finally said. "I'll get on it right away." Ron nodded to himself. "Good. Keep me updated." He hung up without another word, pocketed his phone, and headed inside. Elliot was already at the dining table, setting down a plate with a flourish like he was serving at a five-star restaurant. "Here you go, big man. Eat while it's hot." Ron sat, giving him a curious look. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," Elliot said, shrugging. "Just figured you might want something decent after a long day." He sat across from Ron, leaning forward with an almost conspiratorial grin. "Hey, you should get me an FPV drone." Ron froze mid-bite, raising an eyebrow. "A drone?" "Yeah. You know, first-person view, racing style, real fast." Ron studied him for a moment, then chuckled. "That's random. But okay, I'll order one tonight. You'll have it tomorrow. Just don't peep into that Mrs. Haley's house. I know she is a knocker, but she is too clingy. I don't want her near our house." Elliot grinned like a kid who'd just been told Christmas came early. "Knew you'd see it my way." After dinner, Ron walked down the hall to Jerry's room. The door was half open, and Jerry was sitting on the edge of his bed, fiddling with something in his hands. They locked eyes for a moment. Ron braced himself for the usual glare, that familiar cocktail of rage and contempt that Jerry wore like armor. But it wasn't there. Jerry's gaze wasn't warm. Far from it, but it lacked the sharp bite of hatred Ron had come to expect. No fury, no barely contained anger, just something quieter. Ron let a small smile creep onto his face. "Evening, kid." Jerry didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. Ron lingered a second longer, then nodded and headed back to his room, feeling strangely lighter than when he'd walked in. That night, around 1 a.m., Ron's phone rang, jarring him out of a half-sleep. He grabbed it off the nightstand and saw the caller ID, local police department. "This is Ron," he answered, his voice rough. "Mr. Ron, this is Officer Leibovitz from the precinct. We need you to come down to the station immediately," the officer said. Ron sat up. "What's going on?" "It's about Xavier. I'll explain when you get here." Ron didn't waste another second. He threw on jeans, grabbed his keys, and was out the door. The streets were dead quiet as he drove, his mind running through 100 scenarios, none of them good. When he arrived at the station, Leibovitz was waiting near the front desk. His face was grim. "Xavier's in custody," Leibovitz began. "He shot and killed his wife and her lover." Ron blinked, trying to process the words. "What?" "According to what we've gathered so far," Leibovitz continued, "he came home late, found the two of them in bed together, and in a fit of rage, he killed them. Both in his own bed." Ron's jaw tightened. "And you're sure about this?" Leibovitz nodded. "Xavier's the one who called us. He surrendered without a fight. Says he doesn't even remember doing it. Claims he just blacked out. Ron exhaled slowly. I need to talk to him. The officer led him to the holding area. Xavier sat on a bench, looking pale, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the floor. Ron stepped closer. Xavier, tell me what happened. Xavier looked up, his voice low and shaky. Ron, I don't remember. I swear to God, I don't remember killing her. 1 second, I walked into the room, and the next, it's just blank. Like I wasn't even there. You're saying you blacked out? Ron asked. I don't even know if it was that. I just can't remember pulling the trigger. I can't remember any of it. Ron studied him for a long moment. All right, first thing tomorrow, I'll get you out on bail. Just keep quiet and don't talk to anyone else about this. Xavier gave a small nod, eyes still clouded with confusion and shock. The next morning, Ron was back at the station with paperwork in hand. After some back and forth, he managed to secure Xavier's release on a $250,000 bond. The process was slow, but within hours, Xavier was walking out of the station, a free man, at least for now. Ron sat in his office late that afternoon, the blinds half drawn, a manila folder spread open in front of him. The police report was laid out in meticulous detail, every photograph, every typed observation. He went over each page slowly, his finger tracing the neat black lines of text. Gunpowder residue on Xavier's right hand. Bullets matching the Colt Anaconda, 6-inch barrel, .44 Magnum rounds, registered to Xavier. A torn box of precision 1.44 Magnum ammunition found near a closet in his home office. Ron's brow tightened as he read the next part. 24 shots fired. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. 24 wasn't just rage, that was execution. The crime scene photos in the report told their own story, and it was one Ron didn't like being a part of. That evening, he called Xavier. The line clicked, and Xavier's voice came on, rough and defensive. Ron, you find something. Ron's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Yeah, I've seen enough, Xavier. What's that supposed to mean? Xavier asked sharply. It means, Ron said, his tone deliberate. I'm not going to be your lawyer anymore. Effective immediately, there was a pause on the other end. You're kidding me. No, I'm not. Ron, listen, Xavier's voice dropped into a low, urgent tone. $2 million. Cash. You get me out of this, and it's yours. Ron closed the folder in front of him with a snap. Not interested. You'd walk away from $2 million? Xavier said, disbelief creeping in. I'd walk away from a hell of a lot more than that, Ron replied, his voice flat. We're done here. Ron didn't wait for Xavier's reply. He simply ended the call, set the police report under his arm, and left his office without a backward glance. The streets were quiet, lit in patches by the orange glow of old street lamps, as he made his way to a small, out-of-the-way diner. Willie was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee in hand. When Ron slid into the seat across from him, Willie didn't waste time. He pushed a thick manila file across the table. Ron flipped it open, his eyes scanning page after page. His expression hardened with every line. You sure about this? Ron asked, glancing up. Dead sure, Willie replied. Every word, every photo in there is real. Ron closed the file with deliberate care. Then recalling Leibovitz. They stepped outside, and Ron dialed the number. Officer Leibovitz answered on the first ring. Leibovitz, he said briskly. It's Ron, he replied. Meet me at Velvet Confessions. You know the place. There was a pause, then a low grunt. 2 hours. 2 hours later, the neon glow of Velvet Confessions reflected off the wet pavement as Leibovitz walked in. He found Ron leaning casually against the end of the bar, Willie sitting nearby. Without a word, Ron handed him the file. Leibovitz opened it and began to read. His brow furrowed almost immediately, his lips tightening as he flipped through the pages. Where the hell did you get this? He asked, his voice low but edged with surprise. Willie gave a half smile and shrugged. Trade secret. Ron, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, had his mind working in overdrive. This wasn't random, he thought. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became. Xavier had planned this whole thing. He pointed toward one page in the report. Look at this. Audrey's phone sent Nathaniel a message, telling him to come over to her house that night. That's odd, right? Because every previous report mentions she always went to his place. Always. No exceptions. Leibovitz glanced at the page, then at Ron. So you're saying? I'm saying she didn't send that text willingly. Ron's tone was grim, steady. Someone, Xavier, forced her to call him over. Probably at gunpoint. Then, once Nathaniel got there, both of them ended up dead in his bed. Think about it. Makes it look like he snapped in a fit of rage. Convenient, isn't it? Willie nodded slowly, piecing it together. And with his medical records showing he'd been on those meds. Exactly, Ron cut in. Xavier could have claimed diminished responsibility. Could have walked away free, saying the drugs messed with his head and made him act without thinking. Hell, with the right lawyer, a jury might have believed it. Leibovitz leaned back in his chair, absorbing the weight of the theory. That's actually not a bad plan. Ron's eyes hardened. Yeah, it would have worked. But Willie's digging, and my instincts just tore it apart. Xavier almost got away with murder. Willie smirked faintly. Almost. Ron's jaw tightened. Not anymore. You ever think about working as a consultant for the department? Leibovitz asked. Willie shook his head. Not my style. I like sleeping in my own bed, without a badge over my head. Ron's tone was flat, but firm. That file? You never got it from me. We never met tonight. Leibovitz looked up from the papers, measuring Ron's gaze. And the cameras in this place? The moment you walk out, Ron said, loop will reset like nothing happened. Leibovitz gave a small nod, closed the file, and tucked it under his arm. Understood. I appreciate this, Ron. Ron didn't answer, and Leibovitz didn't push. He just turned and headed for the door, disappearing into the wet night. The next day, the police submitted the evidence to the court. The file painted a grim, humiliating picture of Xavier's marriage. Xavier had been well aware of his wife Audrey's affair with Nathaniel Watson. But that wasn't the part that shocked anyone in the courtroom. The real story was the why. For 5 years, their marriage had been a prison of verbal cruelty and physical beatings. Xavier's words could cut as sharply as his hands, and both were used freely. People wondered why Audrey never spoke out, why she hadn't run. The answer was cruelly simple. Xavier had bought her silence. Audrey's parents were both cancer patients, clinging to life through costly treatments. Xavier was footing every single bill. Without his money, they wouldn't survive. She endured the blows and the screaming for their sake. Nathaniel had been her ex-boyfriend, gone from her life for 5 long years. When he reappeared, he found Audrey trapped in a gilded cage. The affair wasn't born from simple passion. It was her brief grasp at something human in the middle of her private hell. Audrey had been only 23 at the time of her death. 23, and already worn down by years of abuse. Xavier was 43, wealthy, and well-connected. He had first met her when she was just an 18-year-old office assistant at his firm. Back then, he'd learned about her family's illnesses, her desperation, and used it like bait. I can help you, Xavier had told her one evening in his office, his tone almost gentle. Your parents don't have to worry about anything, but you'll have to agree to my terms. What terms? She'd asked, her voice trembling. Marry me, he said simply. You'd be well taken care of, and I get to have the most beautiful woman in the room on my arm. That was all it had taken. She said yes, not out of love, but to save her parents. Audrey, with dreams of a happy life, married Xavier at the age of 18. To Xavier, she became an accessory. At every high-profile event, he would parade her before his friends, glass of expensive scotch in one hand, her waist clutched tightly in the other. Come on, sweetheart, he would murmur in her ear at parties, his voice low but sharp. Kiss me, let them see what I've got. When she resisted, when she said no, with that look of quiet humiliation, the price was steep. At home, his temper would flare, shouting first, then the slap, then the shove. The bruises were always hidden well enough to keep the illusion alive. Audrey endured it all in silence. For her parents. For survival. Until Nathaniel came back, and for a moment, she remembered what it was like to feel safe. Audrey never saw it coming when Nathaniel reappeared in her life. It was at the clinic, a simple encounter, her clutching her mother's prescription in one hand, him holding a cup of coffee in the other. The moment their eyes met, it was as if the years apart dissolved into nothing. The pull was instant. Old memories resurfaced, heavy with the weight of what could have been. Within days, Audrey was back in Nathaniel's bed, wrapped in the warmth and tenderness she hadn't felt in years. She compared her husband to Nathaniel. Her husband had his way with her, ignoring her needs and desires. Nathaniel made love to her. The difference was clear. She thought she was safe there, hidden, but she wasn't. From the day Xavier had proposed to her, she had been under surveillance. She never knew the faces. Always a shadow in the corner, a car that slowed when she crossed the street, the feeling of eyes tracking her movements. Xavier had made it clear to his men, never stop her from doing anything. Watch. Always watch. Record everything. Xavier wanted her, but more than that, he wanted control. When she came back from Nathaniel's apartment, the house always felt suffocating, thick with an unspoken tension that pressed against her chest. The silence was sharp, broken only by the pounding of her own heartbeat. Xavier would be there, sitting in the dim glow of the living room, a glass of whiskey cradled in his hand. He already knew she had just left her lover's bed. Have a good time? He would ask, voice calm, almost amused. She wouldn't answer. She knew it didn't matter. Then he would take her, sometimes slowly, more often violently. It wasn't love, not even lust. It was war, a battle to reclaim something he believed belonged to him. His touch was a punishment, his grip bruising, his breath hot with the stench of liquor. Xavier knew where she had been. He knew who she was with. And in his deranged mind, letting her go to Nathaniel only made the game sweeter. He'd watch her leave, knowing she'd return, and when she did, he'd remind her exactly whose possession she was. To him, Nathaniel wasn't a threat, he was a challenge. And Xavier had never lost a game. Go on, he had once thought to himself while taking her back. Run to him. Give him all that sweetness. Just remember, Audrey, you always come back to me. And when you do, I'll take back every inch of you he touched. She lay awake at night after those encounters, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the prison she was in didn't have walls. It was inside her mind. And Xavier was holding the key. Xavier had always believed he was the smartest man in the room. For months, he played his game in silence, watching Audrey slip away piece by piece, her heart still chained to Nathaniel. But all things must come to an end. It happened one night. Xavier overheard them. Low voices, the hum of Nathaniel's deep tone, Audrey's softer but urgent reply. Words that cut him open and set the bleeding rage in motion. We'll file for divorce soon. Then, we can finally be together. Xavier stood outside the partially open door, jaw tight, fingers curling into his palms until the nails dug in. At first, his mind drifted to the cards he held. Audrey's parents, fragile and ailing. He could keep her through them. But reality crept in like a slow-moving shadow. Her parents could be gone in 6 months, maybe less. And once they were, so was she. That thought clawed at him until it became something else, something darker. He doubled down. His presence became heavier, more consuming. In bed, he was rougher, almost inhuman. Outside of it, he turned on the charm, wrapping her in displays of affection that felt more like chains than comfort. But the truth was stubborn. No matter what he did, Audrey's eyes still flickered with the ghost of Nathaniel. Xavier's thoughts twisted, sharpened. If she couldn't be mine, she wouldn't belong to anyone, and no one would be left standing. He began constructing the perfect picture in his mind, an unshakable narrative. The cheating wife, her manipulative psychiatrist lover, and the pitiful, innocent husband crushed beneath their cruelty. The next steps came naturally. The medication, purchased from the dark web, arrived in small, unmarked packages. He worked the pieces into place, every move calculated, every expression rehearsed. But a plan like this needed power. Someone the courts and the press would pay attention to. Enter Ron Jeremy, divorce lawyer with a reputation for winning ugly battles. When Xavier sat across from Ron for the first time, he felt that old rush of control. He was spinning the story with precision, calm voice, perfect pauses, until the day Ron asked him to file a police complaint. I'll go home first, he said, voice quiet but filled with purpose. And call the cops. It sounded right, but Ron had been in this game long enough to know when someone's words were window dressing. Later, Ron called Willie. Willie, I need you to dig a bit deeper into Xavier. Willie didn't waste time with questions. He knew that tone. He moved fast, scraping through public records, then slipping into darker channels. Within days, he found a trail most people wouldn't have even noticed. A private security agency. Not just a one-off hire, months of quiet surveillance. The target? Audrey. Willie felt the shift in his gut. Surveillance meant obsession. And obsession never ended well. Willie pushed further, tracing payment routes, encrypted messages, camera logs. The picture came into focus. Xavier's neat story was a facade. The truth underneath wasn't just flawed, it was rotten. The lies were deliberate, designed to manipulate, to crush. At the diner when Ron met Willie, he flipped through the pages. Dates, addresses, intercepted emails. Each one tightened the noose around Xavier's narrative. This, Willie began, then hesitated. This isn't a man looking for justice. This is a man who wants to watch someone burn. Ron closed the file. He already knew. The problem with men like Xavier wasn't that they lied. It was that their lies were built to last, reinforced with just enough truth to fool almost anyone. Ron understood what came next. If he stayed, he'd be the face beside Xavier in the media, the betrayed husband's defender. People would sympathize. They wouldn't look deeper. But if he left, that would make people ask questions. And Ron wanted questions. Questions tore holes in the lies. That evening, he called Xavier. I'm not going to be your lawyer anymore. Effective immediately. Offer of $2 million did not move Ron. He was worth far more. Once Leibovitz submitted the evidences to the DA's office, they immediately called for his arrest. The cops were at Xavier's door with a warrant, but the house was empty. Xavier was already gone, slipped into the wind before anyone could put a hand on him. And Ron knew, somewhere out there, the game hadn't ended. It had just shifted into the shadows. Back at home, Elliot was sitting beside Jerry. He made a few adjustments to the drone's camera settings and connected it to the TV in Jerry's room. Without a word, he opened the window and let the drone fly out into the open air. The small machine hummed its way toward the nearby park, the camera feed flickering to life on the TV screen. Jerry watched as the familiar stretch of green appeared, dotted with kids running, shouting, and laughing. "That's the same park you used to play in," Elliot said, his tone casual but steady. Jerry's eyes narrowed at the image. And then, faces. Recognizable faces. Friends from before. His throat tightened, and before long, his eyes were glistening. "Don't you miss it?" Elliot asked, his voice dipping lower, almost coaxing. "Playing with your friends? All you have to do is take that therapy seriously, get up, go out there, and play again." The words hit hard. Jerry's face twisted, his breath sharp. Then, like a dam breaking, he screamed, "I hate you all. You guys killed my father. I hate you all. I was supposed to be with my dad. I hate you all." Elliot didn't move, didn't speak. His face, however, began to change, flushed with heat, a slow, simmering red creeping up from his neck. He reached for the drone controls, recalled it without another word, and the feed on the TV went dark. When the drone returned, Elliot packed it away with quiet precision, sliding it back into its box, sealing it shut. He carried it to his room, set it down, and came back to Jerry's. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pulled it closer to the bed and sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Jerry's. "Do you have anything else to add, kid?" Jerry said nothing. Elliot tilted his head slightly. "Since you don't have anything to say, allow me to say it. And kid, what I'm about to say, you are not going to like. But since all you talk about is hate, let me show you hate." His tone hardened. "You keep blaming Ron for your father's death. Your father was a weak-willed, spineless man who gave up when the fight got tough. So stop making him a martyr. He's probably rotting in hell right now." Jerry's mouth fell open, but Elliot didn't let him speak. "Now open your ears and listen, you little bastard, because I'm only going to say this once," Elliot said, his tone a low, venomous growl. "You're breathing right now because Ron had enough decency to drag your sorry carcass out of the gutter and bring you here. If it weren't for him, you'd be rotting on a mattressless cot in some piss-stained back room, under the care of someone who'd only touch you long enough to collect a government check." He leaned in until Jerry could feel the heat of his breath. "You worship this thing you call hate. So tell me, what the hell does it give you? Does it put food in your mouth? Does it make your useless legs work again?" His voice dripped with mockery. "No, all it gives you is that pathetic, slack-jawed look you've got right now." Jerry's eyes brimmed, his face tightening, but Elliot didn't stop. He pressed harder, each word like a nail. "Here's the ugly truth, kid, you're paralyzed. You can't even drag your crippled body to the toilet without help. I feed you. I wipe you clean like a baby. And still you hate me?" Elliot's mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Fine. Keep your hate. Bathe in it. Let it rot you from the inside out. Because all it's ever going to do is keep you trapped in that bed, rotting slowly, while the rest of us just stand here and watch." Elliot straightened slowly, the chair scraping against the floor as he rose. His shadow stretched across the small room, swallowing Jerry in its outline. "Don't worry, kid," Elliot said, his tone low and deliberate, like each word was being carved out of stone. "I'll keep coming back. I'll feed you. I'll clean you. I'll do every damn thing expected of me, because Ron brought me here for that. He asked me to help you, and I gave that man my word." Jerry's eyes flickered at Ron's name, but he didn't speak. His jaw worked as though he wanted to spit something back, but Elliot didn't give him the space. "You think I came here out of pity?" Elliot's voice grew colder. "I was 2 seconds away from putting a bullet through my skull. I already had the revolver loaded. My mouth was dry, my hands steady. I was ready to check out. No grand speeches, no note, nothing. Just gone. Just like your loser dad." He leaned forward again, letting the weight of his words drop like lead. Then Ron stepped in. "That man," his voice sharpened, almost cutting, "gave me something to live for, and I will honor that until my last breath." Elliot straightened, his eyes narrowing. "But here's the thing, kid. Going forward, I'm done dragging you out of your misery. I'm done wasting my breath on you. I'll still keep you alive, because I promised Ron, but you can rot in your own hell. I won't throw you a rope anymore. You either claw your way out yourself, or you just keep sinking until you disappear in your own filth." Jerry's lips trembled, his gaze darting between Elliot and the wall. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier. Elliot lingered in the doorway for a moment, his hand resting on the frame, eyes locked on Jerry with an expression that was neither pity nor anger, just a final, absolute detachment. "I don't care anymore," he said flatly, before stepping out and letting the door close with a slow, suffocating click. That night, Ron and Elliot sat across from each other at the dinner table. The clinking of cutlery was the only sound between them. Both men were lost in their own thoughts. Elliot replaying the sharp words he'd thrown at Jerry earlier, regretting how far he'd let his temper slip. Ron's mind elsewhere entirely, his jaw tight as he thought of Xavier still walking free somewhere in the city. Neither of them said much. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken frustration. After eating in silence, they retired to their rooms. The next morning, Elliot slipped back into his routine. He wheeled in the basin, cleaned Jerry with practiced hands, and fed him breakfast without a single unnecessary word. Jerry kept his eyes down, his usual venom strangely absent. Around mid-morning, Joel, the physiotherapist, arrived. "All right, Jerry," Joel said with forced cheer. "Let's get to work." He positioned the equipment and began their usual exercises. But today, something was different. For the first time since they'd started, Joel felt resistance. Not in the form of refusal, but effort. Jerry's arms trembled, his breaths quickened, his forehead glistened with sweat. He gritted his teeth and pushed through each rep until Joel finally had to stop him. "That's enough," Joel said, patting his shoulder. "You did good today, Jerry. Real good." Elliot stood in the corner, arms crossed, his expression cold. Inside, there was a flicker of pride, but he buried it deep, not letting Jerry catch even a shadow of it. The rest of the day passed without the usual distractions. No TV, no movies. Jerry's room felt quieter, heavier. He stared at the ceiling, brooding in silence. That night, Ron came home. His steps were uneven, his breath sharp with alcohol. Elliot noticed instantly. "You're drunk," Elliot said flatly. "I'm celebrating," Ron replied, tossing his coat over the back of a chair. His eyes had a dangerous gleam. "Xavier's dead." Elliot looked up sharply. "Dead? How?" "Someone found him before the cops could. And there was a note," Ron said, smirking like he was savoring the words. "It said he'd been judged guilty, signed by someone calling themselves the Scarlet Judge. Load of bullshit, vigilante justice. Some Batman shit, with murder." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "Scarlet Judge? Whoever he is, I owe him a drink," Ron muttered, grabbing a fresh glass. "Now come on, let's go see Jerry." Elliot hesitated, then stood, following Ron toward the boys' room. The sound of Ron's boots heavy in the hallway. Whatever Ron was planning to say to Jerry tonight, Elliot knew it wouldn't be without emotional drama. Ron walked quietly into Jerry's room. He pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Hey, kid," Ron began, his voice softer than usual. "I wanted to say something. I thought about it long and hard." He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I know you hate me. I know why. Your dad died, and you hold me responsible. It's okay. I'm a bad guy, I get it." He gave a hollow chuckle that quickly faded. "But, kid, I love you. You're the only thing that keeps me alive. Otherwise, I died the day my sister Riley died. She died in my arms. I hate myself for it." His voice trembled now. "So, even if you hate me, that's okay. I deserve hate. But you..." Ron's gaze lifted to meet Jerry's. "You, sir, you deserve all the love and happiness in the world. So, I'll live, and I'll live for you, sir." He stood abruptly, perhaps to keep his own emotions from spilling over, and gave Jerry a sharp, almost comical salute, like Jerry was an army general and Ron his subordinate. Jerry's eyes, tired yet focused, stayed on him. Then, for the first time in years, he spoke. His voice was raspy but steady. "Ronald James Jeremy, thank you for keeping me alive." Ron froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor beside the bed, clutching the frame as tears flooded his eyes. He pressed his forehead against Jerry's foot, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, kid. I'm sorry for your dad. I'm sorry for Riley. And I'm sorry for you." Jerry's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "When I grow up," he said, "I'll be a lawyer like you, but I won't be you. I'll be better." Ron let out a choked laugh, a strange mix of pride and pain. Jerry slowly turned his head toward Elliot, who had been standing quietly in the corner. "I'm sorry," Jerry said. "You don't owe me anything, not even sympathy. But I'm thankful you're here." Elliot walked over, resting a hand on Jerry's head and ruffling his hair gently. "Kid," Elliot said, his voice low, "you've got more fight in you than half the people I know." In that small, dimly lit room, 3 lives that had been weighed down by grief and anger for years found something unexpected: hope. Tears glistened in the eyes of 2 men and a child, but they no longer carried the same heaviness. For the first time in a long time, their hearts felt lighter. Outside, the night was still and quiet, but in that room, it felt like the first warm sunrise after a long winter, soft, promising, and full of the unshakable belief that tomorrow would be better. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.